U.S. government agents travel to the desert to visit an elderly Mexican couple after a report of a fallen extraterrestrial object. The agitated old lady calls the agents into the trailer to see her husband, who has begun to behave strangely. After checking the radiation levels in their home, the men in black remove their gas masks and proceed to interview the old man. With empty gaze, he repeats over and over again words about rebirth, then turns his gaze to one of the agents and puts a cross in his hands. It turns out that until that day the man was completely blind, but for unknown reasons, he suddenly regained his sight. The frustrated agents find no viable specimens at the site of the object crash, so they take the old man into custody for further observation of his condition. Meanwhile, an auto mechanic named David Chamberlain is going through a difficult time in his life. His beloved wife Jane has passed away after a long illness, leaving him alone with his teenage daughter Annabelle. Due to the lack of orders, the workshop where the man works is on the verge of bankruptcy. David does his best to keep his job for the sake of his daughter and offers his boss options on how to get out of the crisis, but he does not want to hear anything. Zach, a war veteran from the war that is currently taking place in Iran, comes into the shop asking for a job. Despite the guy's pleas to give him a chance, David is forced to turn him down. In the evening, David goes to a bar to drown his problems in alcohol. Zach spends his time in the same bar listening to a report about the military clash in Iran. One of the local drunks speaks poorly of the American army. Watching the war only on TV, he is sure that he would have done better on the battlefield. His behavior irritates Zach and he challenges the bully to a fight. Along with a bunch of other thugs, the bully starts beating up the soldier in the parking lot, but David stands up for the guy. The fight stops as soon as one of the attackers rips off the war veteran's prosthetic leg. The hooligans scatter, not wanting to mess with a man with disabilities. David returns Zach's prosthetic leg and gives him a ride to the Veterans Rehabilitation Center. On the way, he hints to the guy that he won't change anything by getting into pointless fights. However, Zach snaps back and calls the auto mechanic a misunderstood moron. The guy is sure that the mechanic can't understand what it's like to lose everything and have no future overnight. When David returns home, he finds a birthday cake on the table, carefully prepared by his daughter Annabelle. The girl tells her father that she has dropped out of college and plans to stay with him. The man starts scolding his daughter, thinking that she dropped out because of a boyfriend or a teenage crisis, but the reason turns out to be something else. Annabelle admits that his last 2 payments didn't go through, and she was forced to come home from college. David promises to make things right and get the money in a week, but the girl doesn't want her father to overwork himself again. The man worries that he can't give his daughter a good future like her mother would have wanted. Remaining at the table alone, he looks sadly at the watch Annabelle gave him with her last money. Upset, David wants to get drunk, but as luck would have it, all the alcohol in the house has run out. The mechanic decides to restock and goes to the store in the middle of the night. On his way back, he notices a bright ball of light in the sky, which rapidly falls to the ground. Out of surprise, David loses control and his car goes off into a ditch. After a while he wakes up in the wrecked car. Everything around him is illuminated by the warm glow of the fallen extraterrestrial object. Suddenly he notices a woman's silhouette flickering among the trees ahead of him. It looks painfully familiar and dear to David. Despite his serious wounds, he gets up, and, staggering, follows the silhouette. Waking up the next morning, Annabelle discovers that her father has never returned home since the previous night. The girl senses that something bad has happened and calls the police to immediately begin a search for her father. However, the sheriff refuses to declare David wanted until the required 24 hours have passed. The disturbed Annabelle can't wait that long and goes to her father's workplace. The owner of the car repair shop, Ned Wilcox, doesn't know anything about David's whereabouts and isn't particularly worried about his fate. The girl continues her search and finds her father's overturned car on the side of the road near a small forest just before evening. She searches for him until late at night, exploring the forest wilderness. Soon the batteries in her flashlight run out and she is forced to go back to the car. The girl cries from helplessness, because every lost minute for her father could be his last. Having calmed down, the girl starts the car and in amazement sees David illuminated from the headlights, emerging from the woods. Annabelle takes her father to the hospital, where the doctor gives her some shocking news. For unknown reasons, David has 2 functioning kidneys, although, based on medical records, one of them has been transplanted into his wife in the past. The movie hints to us that the removed kidney was rejected by his wife's body and this resulted in her passing away. David wakes up with an unusual feeling inside. On the way home, he looks out at the sun thoughtfully and his mind flashes back to his departed wife, waiting for him by the tall tree. He goes out into the yard and sits in the rocking chair where Jane used to spend her time. He tries to recall the events of the previous night and understand what happened to him after the accident. David recalls chasing a female silhouette and falling into a crater next to the fallen meteorite. The alien object was shaped like an egg and emitted a pleasant blue glow. When the man lost consciousness again, thin tentacles began to reach out to him from the meteorite. At dinner, Annabelle worriedly tells her father that he had been talking deliriously to her mother while he was unconscious. After giving him words of encouragement, she goes to bed. David continues to watch the news, broadcasting increasing tensions on the front. Russia, China and France threaten retaliation against U.S. attempts to invade Afghanistan. After hearing this, the man looks anxiously out the window. Suddenly he hears a woman's voice calling his name. As he goes to answer the call, he meets his beloved wife and rushes into her arms. In his vision, Jane shows her husband snippets of events from the future, one of which involves a nuclear explosion. After coming to his senses, David decides not to waste another minute, and goes to the garage to put on paper the blueprint he has seen. The man is convinced that the alien object is sending him visions through his wife and only he can save Annabelle from the coming danger. Meanwhile, the government agents argue with their supervisor about the importance of searching for and researching extraterrestrial objects. They believe that the alien stones can have a huge impact on humanity and can put an end to all military conflicts forever. The boss does not support their ideas, as he is convinced that the ongoing war in Iran is necessary for the economic recovery of the country. He later learns from a professor that the alien specimens found have not survived. Finding new living specimens could take a long time, so the agent orders the professor to perform an autopsy on the elderly Mexican they snatched earlier for research. Stipe tells his subordinate to inform the old man's wife that her beloved has been taken away by a deadly virus. He chillingly reasons that one forced sacrifice means nothing compared to the American soldiers who are giving up their lives every day in Iran. The next day, David locates his wife's old car in the garage and plunges back into the painful memories of his beloved. While Annabelle is out of sight, she revisits old videotapes where their family was happy and enjoyed every moment together. Meanwhile, at the rehab center, Zach and his battle buddy Jim O'Malley talk about the military conflicts their country has waged. Despite the amputation of his lower limb, Jim is disgusted by the lack of action and wants to return to the front in place of the young draftees. Zach does not share his zeal, as he has had his fair share of war. Luckily for Zach, David comes to the rehab center to offer him a job. The ex-military man agrees without a second thought, and the two of them drive into the woods. David asks Zach to turn on the winch on command, and he goes to the crash site of the extraterrestrial object and discovers that grass has begun to grow around it. They struggle to load the alien object into the car. Suddenly, Zach jerks his hand away in amazement, feeling something unusual as he comes into contact with the meteorite. While her father wasn't home, Annabelle decided to go through her mother's things to take to the barn or give to charity. The girl is sure that this will make it easier for the two of them to cope with the loss. David does not approve of his daughter's scheme, for he cherishes every memory of his beloved Jane. He has no intention of pretending that she never existed in order to move on with his life. Zach wakes up in the middle of the night with severe pain in his amputated leg. The next day he tells Jim about it, but his friend is convinced that it's just phantom pains. Later that morning, all the patients of the rehabilitation center come out to protest against sending conscripts to the front for the occupation in Afghanistan. However, the civilians do not support the anti-war rally. One of the townspeople spits in O'Malley's face, calling the former fighter a traitor to the homeland. In an attempt to punch the man, the veteran falls off his wheelchair. Zach wants to help his friend get up, but falls over due to a new painful episode to his leg. The police are called to the scene and all protesters are quickly dispersed. David examines the meteorite in his barn and notices that the living organism is getting worse in the sunlight. Suffering from unbearable pain, Zach bursts into the mechanic's house and demands an explanation. Soon the guy is rapidly getting worse. His fever rises and red fluid begins leaking from his injured leg. After removing his prosthetic limb from the suffering fighter, David discovers that his missing limb is beginning to grow back. In the mechanic's mind, the whole puzzle immediately comes together. A meteorite sent to Earth has the power to heal anyone near him. David asks Annabelle to keep an eye on the fighter, and he leaves in an unknown direction. At the same time, Agent Stipe is informed of the landing of a fourth extraterrestrial object. Zach has nightmares about the day he was wounded at the front. Waking up, he is surprised to find Annabelle in front of him. In the evening, David returns home and, without explanation, asks his daughter to help him carry Zach to the barn. He sets the fighter down next to the meteorite and cools the extraterrestrial object with cooling gas. Immediately thin tentacles reach out to Zach and envelop his arm. At their touch, the fighter's missing limb begins to grow rapidly into a healthy leg. Annabelle accidentally touches the alien object, after which she collapses. She dreams of her mother in a hospital room calling for David. In the morning, the girl comes to her senses and accepts to observe Zach's walk in the yard with interest. The guy timidly walks with two healthy legs and can't believe his happiness. Left alone in the kitchen, Zach and Annabelle discuss with amazement what happened last night. Later, they find David in the barn, where he is finishing a drawing of an unusual capsule. According to him, the design is supposed to protect the meteorite from impending danger. Annabelle is concerned about her father's obsession with the extraterrestrial object, but he asks his daughter to trust him. Examining David's blueprints, Zach notices that the structure will require a lot of steel plates. The men work out a plan of action. David gets his high school friend Tony Cirio drunk in a bar until he is unconscious. Then, with Zach's help, he steals his keys to his work. Together they steal the necessary materials and a cement mixer truck from Tony's employer, and bring the loot to an abandoned factory. Stipe and other agents arrive at the crash site of the meteorite in the woods. Only a few small fragments remain of the extraterrestrial object. Local Sheriff Williams gives the agents a tip on David Chamberlain, who crashed his car near the site a few days ago. The officer doesn't believe in coincidences and suggests that the auto mechanic may be the one who took the extraterrestrial object. After studying the meteorite fragments, the scientists come up with a shocking discovery. It turns out that the extraterrestrial object is a carrier of DNA strands of various plants and animals, including human DNA. This incredible discovery is an example of abiogenesis and may precede the evolution of all mankind. While David and Zach develop a protective structure for the meteorite, Annabelle visits her mother's grave at the cemetery. She admits that she finds it difficult not to have negative feelings for her father and to forgive him every time he fails to live up to her hopes. The men finish building the capsule and place the meteorite there, thus beginning something new. At the same moment, Annabelle decides to end her tragic past forever and burn her mother's belongings. The girl is stopped by government agents who have come to their house looking for David. When the mechanic returns, the agents question him about the accident, but the man lies about not remembering the events of that night. Agent Stipe talks about the incredible significance of the mysterious alien object to humanity and how it will help stop wars, but David is unimpressed with his words about keeping peace on the planet. Then Stipe informs the mechanic that they are aware of the magical recovery of the kidney in his body. They also show a photo from the autopsy of an old man who was also cured after colliding with an alien object. David immediately comes up with a new lie and takes the agents to his barn. He admits that he kept the meteorite indoors, but over time the object simply melted down under exposure to the outside environment. When the agents leave, Annabelle decides to appeal to her father's intelligence. She fears the agents will take him away for experiments and asks him to give them what they want. The girl is convinced that the meteorite has a detrimental effect on her father and is causing him to hallucinate about his gone wife. David, however, is convinced otherwise. The alien object specifically uses Jane's image to warn the man of an impending nuclear disaster. The government agents don't believe David's lies and have him followed. Noticing this, the mechanic asks his friend Tony to cover for him, and the Secret Service loses him. Stipe tells Agent Lubinsky to lure David out of hiding with the help of his daughter. Meanwhile, Chief Tony shows him the surveillance footage of David caught the night of the break-in. He orders his subordinate to return the loot or he will fire him. While working on the construction for the meteorite, Zach remembers his wounded comrade O'Malley. The war has rendered him helpless, and society has rejected him and slapped him in the face. Zach wants to restore justice and give his friend a second chance, so he returns to the rehabilitation center. There Annabelle is already waiting for him, confessing that she is worried about her father, since the government agents may take him. Zach promises the girl that he will protect David and brings her to meet Jim. The guy asks his comrade to go with him and promises him miraculous healing. He shows Jim his grown leg, but his friend refuses his help. When the discouraged guys leave the rehab center, they are taken captive by government agents on Stipe's orders. In the meantime, Tony finds the abandoned factory where David has hidden the meteorite capsule. He examines the structure with surprise and demands an explanation from his friend. David tries to calm his friend down, but Tony decides to call the police. David cannot allow his secret to be compromised. With a frantic look he rushes at his friend and accidentally knocks him to a breathless state. In the wake of what he has done, the man goes inside the capsule, where life is already gradually beginning to evolve. Filled with remorse, he sees the image of his wife again. He confesses to her that he is unworthy of salvation, and she confirms that. The extraterrestrial object is intended for Annabelle and Zach, whom David must help save from imminent disaster. Meanwhile, Agent Stipe holds Annabelle and Zach captive in David's house. In the background, news reports show Russia's readiness to use nuclear weapons in response to an escalation of the conflict. Stipe is amazed that Zach's amputated leg has grown back. He suggests that the former military man consider the grand prospects of using the alien object for the greater good. Stipe discards the good cop image and begins beating Zach with a stick to get David's whereabouts from him. Meanwhile, the mechanic sneaks into the barn and sets it on fire to cover his tracks. As the agents run toward the blazing structure, David stealthily enters his house and points his weapon at Agent Stipe. Seizing the moment, Annabelle stuns the agent and takes the gun from him. As all three run away, one of the agents shoots Annabelle, knowing that David will lead them straight to the extraterrestrial object to heal his daughter. The company manages to jump into the car, but the wounded girl is on the verge of life and death. David is choking in tears, afraid of losing another member of his family. As they drive to the abandoned factory, the agents follow them relentlessly. Upon arrival, David carefully places Annabelle's breathless body next to the meteorite. However, the gunshot wound never heals, leading the man to despair. He begs the alien object to help his daughter, but it seems to remain impervious to his pleas. Deciding that his daughter is gone, David douses the capsule with gasoline and is about to set fire to the structure, but Stipe stops him. Suddenly the desperate man hears his daughter's voice and Annabelle shows up from the capsule. David puts out his lighter and Stipe immediately shoots him. A firefight breaks out between Zach, David and the agents and they are all wounded. In an unexpected move for Stipe, his subordinate, Lubinsky, shoots him to prevent the facility from being used to advance military objectives. Moments later, a deafening explosion erupts and their showdown loses all meaning. A cloud from a nuclear mushroom rises in the sky, signaling the beginning of a nuclear war in which there will never be any winners. As the people watch mesmerized by the approaching end of the world, the wounded David helps Zach into the capsule and asks him to take care of Annabelle. As he says goodbye, he apologizes to his daughter for not being able to join them and locks the couple inside the structure. Stipe asks David to open the capsule and rescue them, but the door only opens on the inside. In his last moments, David sees the silhouette of his beloved Jane calling him home. Zach tries to comfort the crying Annabelle, when suddenly water begins flowing from the walls of the capsule, quickly filling the entire space around him. When Annabelle and Zach wake up after a long sleep, they discover that the entire world, with the exception of their hiding place, has been reduced to ruins. The capsule is overgrown with grass and insects, which may suggest that centuries have passed since the nuclear war. What would you do with a meteorite if you encountered one in reality? Would you be able to sacrifice all human life to save a loved one? Write about it in the comments and don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel.